Hello, everyone. I hope you're having a great day or night. I really appreciate everyone who is and has decided to support me and the channel, whether you are new or an older viewer. We reached 1,000 subscribers, and I honestly didn't think it would happen as quickly as it did. And I do have to say, it is a really great feeling. Even though it isn't about numbers, I still consider it something as of a feat that has been achieved for the channel and for us. And as always, I just wanted to say thank you for all the love and support, and I hope you enjoy today's stories. There is a little hot springs nestled near the peak of the Passamaroni Pass in central Idaho, though it is hidden in plain sight. Sitting quite literally on the shoulder of the road, it is not well known as an attraction outside of the valley, but the local ranchers are quite familiar with Barney Hot Springs. It's not unusual to drive by it on the weekends and see several families enjoying the water. Barney Hot Springs, or simply Barney's, is incredibly remote, even for Idaho standards. It's at least an hour of driving, over rutty, dirty roads, to the small town of Salmon in the north. If you need a hospital, it's over 2 hours to the regional hospital in Ohio Falls, and that's in the south. To say you're in the middle of nowhere at Barney's is an understatement. But the seclusion is one of Barney's major drawing points. That, and the odd abundance of tropical fish swimming in the year-round warm waters. You can sit back, relax, and take in the surrounding views of the mighty Rocky Mountains with little in the way of distraction. But Barney's isn't at all it seems to be on the surface. An event 40 years ago turned this little hot spring from a local retreat to a local nightmare. On the afternoon of October 27th, 2 truckers stopped for fuel on my parents' gas station and cafe in Howell, Idaho. They were hauling a load of hay over the Passamaroni Pass, headed for the delivery point somewhere in Utah. As the truck fueled, the 2 men settled down at the cafe counter and ordered coffee. Sipping his coffee, the older trucker struck up a conversation with my mother and the regulars in the cafe. He seemed a bit on edge, but was normal in comparison to his younger partner. That young man was clearly shaken. It didn't say more than a quiet yes ma'am or no ma'am to my mom. He kept his attention on the cup of coffee he cradled in his shaking hands. As the old trucker and the others conversated, he brought up a particular event that had happened to them that afternoon. They had crested the Passamaroni Pass and were coming down into a little lost valley. As they approached Barney Hot Springs, standing in the middle of the road was what looked to be a child. Bringing the truck to a stop, they soon realized in horror and fascination what was before them. It was not a child, but an odd, humanoid creature. Its body was slim, with long, slender limbs, and a squat little torso. The head and eyes were large and amphibian-like. It was not standing any taller than a preschooler. They could see its green skin shimmer in the brilliant midday sun, dripping with water. It was clutching a large bundle of what could only be described as hundreds of eggs. The creature watched the truck come to a stop, then awkwardly walked over the rest of the road and down the embankment. It was obvious from the trail of water it left behind that it had just come from Barney Hot Springs. On the other side of the road was a small stream hidden in dense willow bushes. No sooner had the creature disappeared. The 2 truckers were driving away as fast as their Cummins engine would take them. My mom and a few regulars at the cafe took in the man's story with silent, somber expressions and comforting head nods. This wasn't the first time strange things had been witnessed in this little lost valley. Of course, a frogman carrying his brood certainly was the most unique story they had heard in a very long time. The regulars told the trucker not to get too worked up over the incident, as it could have been the autumn sun playing tricks on their eyes. The reassurance seemed to calm the men. They finished their coffee and in a few quick gulps and headed out the door. My mom and the regulars had a good chuckle over the men's story and went on with their day. The following morning, on October 28th, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded in Idaho struck the area. The Bora Peak earthquake was a magnitude 7.5 and could be felt hundreds of miles away. It destroyed farm infrastructure, roads, and bridges. It even killed 2 children on their way to school when a brick building in Chalice, Idaho collapsed on top of them. It was a horrific and frightening day for everyone in Idaho. Barney Hot Springs was not far from the earthquake's epicenter and did not escape its wrath. A couple passing visitors near the springs that morning watched in amazement as the waters drained into the earth, leaving behind a stinking, mucky hole. Minutes later, to their further astonishment, the water came splashing back into the depression, but was now boiling hot. It was a truly bizarre geological event to see. The boiling stopped immediately after the earthquake ceased and the water at Barney's quickly cooled. It's now more of a warm springs, having permanently lost about 15 degrees of temperature after the earthquake. The Frogman has been seen a handful of times since that initial sighting, always near Barney's and almost always standing in the road. I like to think the Frogman was just a dotting parent getting their babies out of harm's way before the earthquake struck and annihilated anything and everything in the hot springs. Barney Hot Springs is still a wildly popular spot for the locals. No one seems too bothered by the idea of sharing the water with a little odd amphibian man and his family. Someone even reintroduced the tropical fish after the boiling incident killed all of them. It remains just one of many weird stories to come out of the Lost Rivers area of Idaho, where I grew up. My encounter happened in February of 2007. I used to work third shift at a paper stock factory warehouse. The main day shift supervisor was on vacation, so our boss on night shift decided she wanted to leave early, so she let us sneak off about 2 hours earlier than our normal shift in time. So this would have been between 4:30 and 5 a.m. I was following a coworker down this county road as the warehouse was on the outskirts of a small rural town. I noticed he hit his brakes and proceeded to swerve off the road. I'm probably 1,000 inches behind him and I'm thinking to myself, what the heck is this guy doing? And that's when I saw it. There was a tall, dark shape strolling down the middle of the road in a hunched over and swaying side to side sort of manner. I have linked it to how one of those tall windblower figures you see swaying at a car dealership or something like that moved. Very unnatural movements. I can't do it justice by describing it, as it would only really make sense if someone saw it themselves, I feel like. It looked like a tall person wrapped in a large, dark blanket or cloak. I had to hit the brakes and swerve too, but I came to a full stop. Whatever it was, I couldn't make out any features or characteristics. I saw a large torso with 2 legs. The upper half was hunched forward as if it was leaning like an older person would with a walker. Now, at the time, I was driving a 1998 Ford Explorer, and I've looked up the height of the vehicle and it lists it at around 6 feet 7 inches. But whatever walked past my driver's window was a good foot or more higher than that, leaning forward. So I believe whatever was walking was over 7 feet tall, minimum. Again, I could not see ahead. Any arms, just a figure with legs walking. My taillights illuminated it as I started to drive past it. I couldn't make out any definite details for the body. I didn't see fur, skin, or anything like clothing. It was solid, not like a translucent type of thing. It was just large. It was thick and black, or at the very least dark gray in color. My coworker had pulled over into the parking lot a little ways down the road, and I followed him in, and you could tell he was scared. He was saying something along the lines of, "What was that? It didn't have a head." Among a lot of other things most panicked people say. We decided to drive back down and try to see if it was still there, and what it actually is. I drove in front and he was following behind. We came up to the general area and I noticed there's a large black animal lying in the middle of the road. It appeared to be a big black dog. Part of me knew this wasn't large enough to be what was walking in the road, but we had enough to stop because it was directly in the middle of the roadway anyway. I decided to get out and walk up to it, all the while my coworkers yelling at me to get back in my vehicle. As I approach whatever is laying in the road, it brings its head up and looks back at me. Its eyes are glowing yellow, which I write off as eye shine from the headlights, but it growls at me. So I stop dead in my tracks and just watch. This thing stands up on its back legs like a person, but falls back down. It sits back up and hobbles off to the side of the road like a wounded animal that wasn't able to use its front legs. It looked like your typical German Shepherd, wolf type face, but its fur was puffy like a chow dog's. It was a lot bigger than most dogs, but still nowhere as tall as whatever was walking down the road. I didn't see any blood or wounds, so I can't say if it was actually hurt or not. My coworker just got out of his car by this point, after it had disappeared into the woodline. We discussed what the heck just happened, but while we were talking, I noticed next to our feet was a mouse. It was just standing there with us, but it was cleaning itself. I nudged it off with my shoe and it just kept cleaning its face, as if it wasn't afraid of us. The mouse was sitting in the upright position, as in it was on its hind legs and using its front paws to wipe itself. I never really considered it until recently that all three of these bizarre happenings was all on 2 legs. We got back in vehicles and drove off, and then the next time at work, I had mentioned what happened, and our coworkers laughed at us. So the other guy who saw it told me if I don't stop talking about it, he's just going to deny it, and I best just forget about it. So, for essentially 15 years, I never told anyone up until recently. I have tried to rationalize it into something that makes sense, but even then it doesn't completely add up. I have tried to explain it in a way that it was just a large dog that must have gotten hit by another vehicle before my coworker and I got there. Maybe it was messing around with the mouse and it got hit, which broke its front legs, so that's why it was trying to use its back ones. The mouse was traumatized from the dog trying to mess with it, so it was just standing there cleaning the dog slobber off of itself. That sounds at least plausible, until the original thing we saw walking without a head. The dog was nowhere as tall as that thing was, so even with the dog standing upright, it was close to 6 feet roughly. But whatever was walking had to have been over 7 feet tall, as it was much taller than my Explorer, even with it hunched forward. I can explain away the dog and mouse, but I can't just explain what that was. So I'm back at square one trying to understand what it could have possibly been. As someone who's always been very skeptical, it becomes very hard to accept the unacceptable. I've always been interested in weird creatures and such, but I never truly believed they existed. I still struggle to believe that all of these crazy stories could be true. And yet, who am I to say they aren't? Especially with the weird crap that my former coworker and I went through that night. All I know is what I saw, but whatever I saw is something I don't know and probably never will. It sounds crazy, and I personally wouldn't be hesitant to believe it if someone else had told me that this happened to them. But that's what happened. It was September in central Idaho. Autumn had come to the mountains, and with it, bow hunters, looking for mountain goats. My cousin, let's call him Vern for anonymity's sake, is an avid hunter. He's been all over North America hunting various game. Bears in Alaska, wild hogs in Texas, bighorn sheep in Wyoming. But his favorite hunting area was the Lemmy Mountain Range in central Idaho. Our extended family has been hunting in those mountains for generations. We know every river bottom and mountain peak like many people know their own neighborhoods. Mountain goats are a fascinating animal to hunt. They live well above the tree line in rocky environments. They are sure-footed and can climb near vertical slopes. Hunting these animals requires one to venture into these dangerous areas. You have to be mindful as you pursue an animal like that. One wrong step on a rocky slope or one loose rock could mean you're not going home ever again. Vern was an expert mountain hunter. It's something he was born to do. Vern decided to hunt in the Hayden River area of the Lemmies. It's a familiar spot to most locals, and the area is home to plenty of mountain goats. The first mile of Vern's hike was uneventful. As he climbed up the canyon, the air was crisp, and his breath formed in great plumes as he progressed. The sun was just peeking over the mountains when Vern came to a small deer trail. He decided it might be a nice shortcut from his usual route and took it. A few hundred feet up the trail, he saw something odd pop out from behind a tree. It was a man. He was dressed in a light denim coat and jeans and was carrying a small backpack. My cousin stopped for a second to get his bearings. Unsure of where this guy came from, the man waved at him with both arms. One of them was holding an older style hunting bow. Acknowledging him, Vern waved back. Although the man looked to be physically fine, it was clear he was emotionally distressed. He yelled out something my cousin couldn't quite hear and waved his arm, indicating my cousin should follow him. Vern didn't get any bad vibes from this man and could tell he was genuinely in need of some help. He began to make his way up the canyon, following this mystery man. Vern could never gain any ground on this guy. He was always just far enough away that he couldn't talk to him. Periodically, the man would stop, turn towards him to make sure Vern was still following. Every time he looked back, Vern could see the worry on his face. My cousin did his best to remain calm and keep a smile on his face, unsure who or what he was being led to. It was peculiar. Vern thought as he hiked, he hadn't seen any other vehicles on his drive up to the trailhead. Perhaps he came in from over another ridge, which he could possibly be leading him to. He figured one of his hunting party had been hurt and needed help. Of course, he wouldn't have had to speculate if the man would just stop and talk to him for 5 minutes. Vern lost sight of this guy just past a turn in the trail. The trail opened up into an incredibly steep, rocky talus slope. He looked in every direction and could not locate the man when he heard a whistle. Looking up, he saw the guy about 500 feet up the rocky slope waving at him. There was no possible way he could have gone up that far in just that short amount of time. He still didn't feel any fear or weariness about this weird situation. The man was waving more frantically now, practically begging Vern to follow him up this slope. With a sigh and a grunt, he started up the rocks. It was slow going. Every other step caused a mini rock slide and would cause him to continually lose his footing. Huffing and puffing on the cool, thin air, my cousin eventually made it to a small landing. It had taken him almost 45 minutes to get to that spot where he saw the man from below. There was no earthly way anyone could have done that scramble up that hill any faster. Totally exhausted and out of breath, Vern sat down on the stone landing. He looked around and couldn't see any man anywhere. As he scanned his surroundings, he saw something odd poking out of a boulder about 20 feet away from him. Walking over to it, he found a weathered boot. 2 boots, actually. Inside those boots and under the boulder as well were bones. Vern looked around once again for the man, but he never saw him again. Instead of feeling eerie or unnerving, Vern felt a sense of relief wash over him. These emotions were not his own. What he felt seemed to have come from all around him. He marked the spot with his GPS and decided to make his way down and call the authorities. The Lemhi County Sheriff's Office responded, and he led them up the canyon to the body. It took 4 men to push the boulder out of the way, and when they did, they found the skeletonized remains of a man. On the body, they found hunting equipment and some personal effects. From a credit card in the wallet, they were able to identify this man. He was a bow hunter that had gone missing almost exactly 53 years beforehand. Vern never wanted to be identified to the public or the missing hunter's family. He didn't want the recognition for something like that. To him, it was just one of those bizarre mountain stories. He was happy that the family got closure, even if it was half a century later. The only thing that bothered him was the man leading him up the canyon, and with his strange and sudden disappearance. He had mentioned the waving man to the sheriff, but was brushed off. When news reports came out announcing the discovery, several photos of the man were published. Vern was absolutely shocked when he saw them. In the photos was the man that had been leading him up the mountain to the body. It finally made sense to him. The man's distressful look, the constant checking if Vern was following him, the sense of relief he felt when the body was discovered. That man was desperate to get home, and through Vern, he was able to finally be reunited with his family. I just want to say thank you everyone for listening, and to reiterate how grateful I am for you being here and how grateful I am for you guys allowing us to reach the milestone that we did. And if your story was told, I'm glad I'm the one who could tell it. I appreciate all the love and support, and I hope you enjoyed today's stories as much as I did reading them.